So I don't know about you guys, but one thing I found consistent in 2020 is that there is a lot of negativity going around. As business owners and marketers, it's important to know how to deal with unhappy customers and unfortunately what to do when you get negative reviews online. So that's what we're going to be talking about today is negative reviews specifically on Google. So I'm going to be talking a lot about how Google deals with these and what you need to be aware of. But to kind of start off, I'm just going to touch on a few reasons why you should care about negative reviews and why they should matter as a business owner or marketer. So there's a study that is done every year by this company called Bright Local, and they do a survey with a lot of people to find out just how people interact with reviews online and what trends they're kind of seeing. So one of the stats that they come out with in this study is that 76% of consumers trust online reviews as much as personal recommendations, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. You basically will go online and you'll look at a business and you will trust the words of some person that you've never met, that you don't even know if they, are a real person, if they actually had this real experience, but you trust what you read because it's posted somewhere online. That is pretty substantial. The interesting thing that I kind of note with this study is that the overall trust in reviews is actually declining year over year. So if we compare 2017's percentage to 2020, it actually went down quite a bit. So that same question, when they proposed it in 2017, 85% of people said that they trusted reviews as much as recommendations, but in 2020, it was only 76%. So I do believe that this is likely happening from a variety of reasons, one of which being consumers are becoming more aware of the problem with how authentic reviews are online and whether or not they can actually trust what they're reading. Another kind of interesting trend that we're noticing with reviews is in regards to the types of reviews that are being left. So Yelp does this blog article every year where they talk about what percentage of reviews on their site are 1-star reviews, what percentage are 2-star, etc. And Google doesn't release this kind of data, so we can't actually look at Google's numbers. But according to Yelp, every year when they release this data, they have a different percentage. And what I'm noticing is that the percentage of 5-star reviews year over year are actually increasing over the last 5 years. So are the percentage of 1-star reviews. So we're kind of seeing this as like the death of anything 2 to 4 stars. Less people are leaving mediocre reviews and more people are leaving reviews when they either are ecstatic or crazy about a place, or on the flip side, if they loathe the place or had a horrible experience. So this is again a trend to be aware of. Important, could have some implications on how you run your business. So you're a business owner or a marketer that works for a business and you get a negative review. Not the greatest scenario, but one that I'm sure a lot of you can sympathize with. So first thing I want to kind of point out, and if you can remember one thing, definitely remember this. As a business owner or marketer, you need to expect to get negative reviews. Realize that you don't live in a perfect world. You or someone that works for you can make mistakes, things can happen, or you might just have unreasonable customers because there are plenty of those around. So either way, expect that at some point, if you haven't dealt with it already, you will get negative reviews. And remember that negative reviews are not actually a horrible thing. They actually can help conversion rates. So this study here that was done was looking at, what is the ideal conversion rate for a business? Do you want to have a 5-star average? Do you want to have a 4-star average? Like what actually results in more people calling or interacting with the business? And they actually found that having a 5-star average is not the best, ideally. And I kind of understand why. Like it's easy to be skeptical as a consumer when you see a 5-star rating. Like, man, is any business really perfect? So they found that the average rating that you want to actually shoot for optimal conversions is 4.2 to 4.5. And of course, I'm not saying, go get a bunch of negative reviews, but keep this in mind when you do get a negative review, that it's not the end of the world and it could actually end up helping you. That being said, it's super important, if you're not doing so already, to make review solicitation a high priority. Like if there's one thing as a business owner that you can do to help your business, this would be it. Make sure you are asking every single customer to leave you a review. And just to give you some data around why you should be asking, There's a company called GatherUp. I'll probably reference them quite a few times during this presentation. And they did a study to see, if passively just asking people for a review was any different than actually soliciting reviews. So there was this one chain that they did this test on, and 80 of the locations, they simply just stuck a button on their website. It said, leave us feedback or leave us a review. They weren't actually asking people. It was just kind of there. Those locations got about 5 reviews a month. The ones that were actively asking, so like pushing notifications out, sending emails, like asking people to leave them a review, were getting 236 per month. So huge difference here. You can kind of see, like, if you don't ask, you generally won't get very many. Once you start asking, you'd be surprised at how normal this is for consumers to be willing to leave you reviews, but you do have to ask. So as far as how you'd want to ask for reviews, really simple. First, if you're not familiar with Google My Business, this presentation is going to talk a lot about Google My Business. It's basically a platform Google has for you as a small business to manage your listing that shows up on Google search. So you need to make sure, you verified your listing through Google My Business. And if you're not sure how to do that, definitely search business.google.com and go through the process of claiming your listing. Provided you've done that, there is a link inside the Google My Business dashboard, so at business.google.com, that you can go to get a link to the review page, basically, that you can send to customers so they can leave you a review. So it's inside the Google My Business dashboard, looks like this. And you can just send that link out to people and say, like, would you mind leaving us a review on Google? The second thing to keep in mind is that sometimes people forget, right? And people get busy. So sending a reminder is a really, really good thing to do. Make sure, if they don't respond the first time, you don't just forget about it. Make sure you do send a reminder. And then the third thing to try is, see if, depending on, the person, how you ask them might make a difference. So for example, maybe email isn't working because they're not somebody that regularly checks their email. So see if sending them a text message works instead. Another thing I've actually heard quite a few attorneys tell me works well is asking when they hand someone a check. So they've just won their lawsuit and they have their settlement check and they're handing it to the person. At that point, they're like, "Hey, would you mind leaving us a review?" Like, obviously, it's going to work well. The other thing you might want to consider is, there is ways to automate some of this. It does cost money. So disclaimer, GatherUp. I don't work there or have any affiliation with the business. We just use them a lot. And they have really awesome studies about reviews. But they do have a paid platform that we use here for ourselves and for some of our clients. And it automates a lot of this process for you, which is great. And also kind of consolidates it into some feedback forms and stuff. So that is an option if you're looking to streamline it a little better. And now, before I get into some of the nuances of negative reviews, I'm going to also give some disclaimers of things you should not do when you are soliciting reviews. So first thing you should not do is do not review gate. And if you're unfamiliar with that terminology or concept, I'm going to kind of explain what it means to review gate. So review gating was, I guess, probably still is a pretty popular practice amongst businesses where before they ask somebody to review them online, they first kind of want to screen the person to see if they're happy or not. And this sounds kind of smart, right? Like, from a marketing perspective, why in the world would you want to send a unhappy customer to Google to leave you a review? Like, it makes perfect sense. So this process, and a lot of tools do this, they, first ask, are you happy? And if the person says yes, then it's like, great, leave us a review on Google. But if the person says no, then, oh, here's this private feedback form that only goes to us and nobody else in the world. So this sounds great in theory. And honestly, from a marketing perspective, it sounds, like a win-win. Unfortunately, this practice is against Google's guidelines. So if you get caught, and obviously there's an if, because Google does not catch anyone, they will remove the reviews that you acquired essentially ever since you started this review gating practice. So we have seen businesses get caught for this. We have seen Google remove a large number of reviews for this. In one case, there was a business that they lost over 400 reviews, which at the time is 80% of their total reviews. And it wasn't just like recent ones. Google actually removed 2 years worth of reviews off this business. So it's a pretty substantial loss. And it actually, not surprisingly, dropped their average rating because all of the reviews that they were getting while they were review gating were all positive, right? So it's a sneaky way of trying to, make sure only positive reviews end up on Google, but definitely is against Google's guidelines. So my advice would be not to do that practice. The other thing we see very commonly is discounts. And people will say, something like, hey, if you leave us a review, we'll enter you in this drawing to win a gift card, which also from a marketing perspective sounds like a great idea. This is against Google's guidelines. And also, a lot of other review sites also have this against their guidelines. There are also actually some legal implications for this as well, depending on the industry and country and whatnot. But this is one thing I would just say avoid completely. You do not want to offer a contest or any type of discount. Anything that's really an incentive for the customer can be seen as in this category and is against Google's guidelines. So if you get caught doing this, this is another reason why Google would remove, your positive reviews. The other thing you shouldn't do is review yourself or ask for reviews from non-customers. Like, don't go to your mom and your sister and your brother and be like, hey, can you review my law firm? And I'm going to use this example all the time because it's funny, where, Paletta Law reviewed themselves and forgot to change their username. So it says Paletta Law left a review for Paletta Law, and then they also responded to themselves, which I think was even funnier. But we see this quite a bit, right? People reviewing themselves, or, they get a bunch of reviews from people with the same last name. And it's like, that's sketchy. This is against Google's guidelines as well, not something I would suggest doing. So moving into negative reviews, I'm going to touch on a few scenarios, and I'm going to get very specific to try and give you an idea of what types of reviews, when it comes to negative reviews, are against Google's guidelines. And their guidelines don't always match up with what you would think or how you feel they should act, but it's Google's world. They make the decisions, and there are a lot of their guidelines that I don't personally agree with, but I'm going to share essentially lots of different scenarios with you that of review types that are against guidelines where we've actually had success getting rid of negative reviews. And in some of these cases, they were negative reviews that the law firm had for years, and then we started working together, and we usually audit their negative reviews to try and figure out which ones we think we can actually get rid of. So this should be hopefully a win. If you've run into any of these scenarios yourself, hopefully you will have success with getting them removed as well. So first, this one seems kind of obvious, but does happen. If the review was left on the wrong place, it will get removed, or should get removed, I should say. So here's an example of a marketing company called WhiteSpark, really great company. And they got over this review. They offer marketing services. So think like SEO services and tools for people that do online marketing. And they got this review that referenced prime rib. And I mean, obviously you don't go to a marketing company to get prime rib. So it was pretty funny. The business owner actually found it very humorous, didn't even want to get rid of it because he just thought it was really entertaining. But in a case like this, where, the person is referencing a service that you don't even offer or a product you don't offer, these are usually fairly easy to get removed. If you can make a case to Google that, here's my website, you can see, I don't offer prime rib. The other scenario, and this one's not quite as cut and dry, but if you have somebody that's leaving a lot of negative reviews in the same industry. So let's say, for example, you have a user that reviewed you, and then they also left negative reviews for 6 other law firms, but then there's one that they left a positive review for. And again, the more obvious it is, the more likely your chance of getting it removed. But it is always important to not just look at the actual review, but to check the reviewer themselves. Click on their name to look at their profile to see what other reviews they're leaving. We've had lots of scenarios with law firms where there was one where this user left a bunch of negative reviews for lawyers, and it was actually very obvious with the way that they wrote the reviews that they were a lawyer themselves. We were able to get those removed. So competitors are not allowed to review you negatively. The trick here is always, of course, how you prove it's a competitor. But these types of reviews are against Google's guidelines and can be removed. This one is pretty common. So reviews from ex-employees. This is something we see quite often, unfortunately. So, scenario, you let somebody go, they're mad, they don't like you, they go on Google and they leave you a negative review. So the key here, however, is proof. So this is where it gets tricky. Google, has certain standards when it comes to privacy, and some of you might laugh and think, oh, Google, they don't care about privacy. They know everything about everybody, but they actually do care about privacy. So if you are trying to tell Google that this person that reviewed you was an employee, you cannot use any type of private or confidential information. So for example, If you're trying to say like, James Slater works for me, he was an employee here, this review should be removed, you can't send Google a copy of James's pay stub. You can't send him the job offer letter. Like any of that information that is not publicly available online is not something that Google would take into consideration. So for example, this was a business I was helping, and they were in the financial space, and there actually is a official government kind of database for financial services providers, and it lists every single individual and has also a list of where they've worked. So I was actually able to show Google, hey, this guy used to work at this particular financial place and he's now reviewing them. So it was pretty easy in this case because it was like an official register or government document. So the source is really important. If the person was listed on your website under your About Us page or your team page, that's another source that Google usually will accept. You can say, look, they were literally on my website. They were, a former employee here. So you could use that as an example. Things like LinkedIn and Facebook are not quite as obvious. So I've seen those work, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. So whether or not Google will accept Facebook as a source is debatable. Sometimes they do. But the thing to keep in mind is, the problem with Facebook and LinkedIn is those can be altered. They can be edited. They're not technically always true. You can create a fake, Facebook profile for somebody. So that is part of the reason why they're not quite as authoritative and sometimes don't work. The state bar, however, absolutely would be like an authoritative thing that Google would look at. So you got to kind of, when you're making these cases to Google, keep that in mind. Reviews from competitors works the same way. So if your competitor left you a negative review and you were trying to prove to Google that there's no way this was a customer, it was a competitor, again, it's all going to come down to the evidence that you can provide Google. So strong arguments would be things like the state bar, the competitor's website. If it's like their secretary and they're leaving you a negative review, you can easily show Google, hey, here is their website. Here is this lady listed as an employee there. This is not a customer. The other source that some people don't always realize is authoritative, but that Google generally trusts, is the BBB. So although the BBB doesn't generally list employees, they do list owners' names of companies. So that is another source that you could potentially point to if you're trying to show Google that there is a review from a competitor that you want removed. Now, this one is unfortunate. I actually wish we didn't have this, but it is a trend that unfortunately I'm seeing grow year over year, and it involves what we call review attacks. This is essentially when you get a large number of negative reviews that aren't real. They usually come in bunches, and it's somebody out there. They're trying to destroy your reputation. Who knows who it is? Could be an ex-girlfriend, could be a customer, could be anybody, right? But they come in volume, right? So that's what we usually use to classify as review attacks. And the sad thing is at this point in time, Google doesn't look at volume as a reason to remove reviews. So if you're just like, Google, this is obvious because there's 15 of them, that unfortunately is not enough for Google to remove them. So volume, keep that in mind, is not something you can use as your evidence when you're trying to get Google to remove a review, unfortunately. So in this example, this is actually one where they wouldn't do it. This business in Denmark, Google was like, we don't see anything against our guidelines about these reviews. And when I was looking at it, it seemed so clear and obvious. You got a business that has a pretty decent reputation, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere, they're getting all of these 1-star reviews in a row, in a week. Like, it seems clear, but this is where, again, reality doesn't always match up with what we see with Google. So keep that in mind. One story I will tell you guys, there was a business that literally fell into this category, and it was a guy that I was helping on the Google My Business forum, and he posted on there and he was like, I'm positive this is my competitor doing this. I think it got up to 19 negative reviews, and they were coming in usually about twice a week. There'd be a new one. And this went on for a couple months, and it was causing him a lot of stress. Google kept refusing to remove them, said, you know what? There's nothing about these that violate our guidelines. The guy was convinced it was a competitor. I was trying to figure out, because he was like, I don't know any customers that would be this upset to the point where they would actually be willing to dedicate months of their life to posting new fake reviews every month. So the guy decided to hire a lawyer, and he did. He hired a lawyer who subpoenaed Google, said, we believe this is a competitor. So if you're not aware of this, you can actually subpoena Google for the records of the people that leave you reviews, but I would really only go down this road as a last resort. And also if you are strongly confident that it is a competitor behind it. In this guy's case, when he subpoenaed Google, they will give out the information on the accounts for the people that left the reviews. So they will give out the person's information that they fill in on their Google profile, including their backup email address, their phone number. When you give that information to Google, when you sign up for an account, you are agreeing to their terms. So if you violate their terms by going and leaving a bunch of fake reviews for a business, your privacy, whatever you want to call it, Google will give that out in the case where they get a subpoena. So in this business's case, when the records got subpoenaed, he got them. It turned out it was actually his competitor. One of the accounts had either a phone number or email address that clearly linked it to the competitor and the girlfriend, I think, of someone that worked there. And they won. They ended up settling with this business, which is why I can't name the business or say who it was. But end result obviously took a lot of months, and it wasn't anything on Google's part. Google still, the whole time this was going on, was like, oh, these are fine. These reviews are fine. So know that, like, worst case scenario, if this ever does happen to you, that there is at least some legal recourse that you can take if Google is being unreasonable. And if you're in this scenario, again, not like a one-off situation, this was a business that had over 19 negative reviews. So it was to the point where it was actually impacting his business and he had to do something about it. Another thing to kind of keep in mind is that sometimes these happen because of things in the media. So this is an example that happened in 2020. There was this guy that went into Costco and he got very aggressive with this elderly lady at Costco, started getting all up in her face, and somebody caught it on camera and then put it on Twitter. And this went viral. It was a guy that worked at an Allstate insurance office in Florida, and Allstate fired this guy immediately for the way that he behaved, I guess, publicly. And you think that's enough. Like they did what they needed to. You can't necessarily control the actions of everyone that works for you. So they did the right thing. But this particular office got slammed with fake, well, I don't want to say fake, but negative reviews on Google that were not customers. So that's why I classify them as fake. They're not people that have actually done business with Allstate Insurance. They are just pissed off people that saw something on social media. And this is an example of one of the reviews that they ended up getting. So in these types of scenarios, these reviews are against Google's guidelines. Keep in mind when you are contacting Google support, again, it all comes down to evidence. You need a copy of the tweet. You need to be able to show Google, like, this was in the media. I've seen this happen quite a bit. We've actually had this happen to clients of ours, unfortunately. But the good news is that usually Google is pretty swift at getting rid of these reviews and will do it because it violates their guidelines. Their guidelines basically state that reviews should be about a customer experience, meaning the person meant to hire you, not necessarily that they hired you, but like if you call somewhere to get a quote or you call intending to hire the law firm, they hang up on you and so you never hired them, that was still a customer experience. Obviously, this dude and his behavior at Costco is not a customer experience for these people leaving the reviews for Allstate Insurance. So these got removed. One thing to keep in mind, unfortunately, if you happen to deal with this type of thing, and I hope you don't because it's a real big pain, people don't forget. So this mob mentality that kind of happens as a result of this, this is the example I kind of look back to. Some of you, probably all of you, have heard of the dentist that killed Cecil the lion. So this was a huge deal back in 2015, over 5 years ago was when this event happened. This guy is still getting negative reviews to this day on his listing on Google. So kind of crazy when I think about it, that like something that happened 5 years ago, people are still thinking about it and they're still mad enough to go leave a review on this guy's dental practice. And again, none of these guys have had their teeth worked on at this office, but they're mad. They're just angry about the fact that he was, did this awful thing 5 years ago. So unfortunately, it is something where as much as you'd like to think it's, a problem for a while, then kind of goes away. When it comes to negative reviews, these things don't seem to go away very fast. If you want another example, there was actually a lawyer in New York City that had a racist comment that he made towards a Mexican lady. And I mean, I don't even know if that guy's profile even exists anymore, but it was so trashed for quite a while every time we looked it up from reviews from all over the place. It is not a scenario that you want to be in, for sure. One thing to keep in mind, there is a feature if you run into this scenario. Again, this is kept for extreme cases. And unfortunately for the dentist in Minnesota, he doesn't know about this or he's just never done it with his listing. But you can actually ask Google to put a block on your listing so that you cannot get reviews. And they don't just do that for anybody, but if they see enough volume and they see that it's continually happening, like these examples that I've been giving, they will actually take the review button off your listing. So this is what it looks like. Another one of these companies that got trashed in social media was Roman Stoneworks, and they don't have a review button on their listing, at least not when I last checked. So Google actually removes the option so that you can't get any new reviews. Keep in mind, this means no reviews. So yeah, you're not going to get any negatives. You also aren't going to get any positives. So it kind of locks in your review state, whatever it was before that social media incident happened. So as you can see on Sterling Sky, my company's listing, this is what it normally looks like. And then with that button removed, basically there's no way for somebody to trash you, which is the idea. Another thing that has happened, consistently, but I would say it was, really a problem in 2020 is politically charged reviews. So not just from the election, but also when it comes to masks and mask policies for stores, Google did deem that this was a political scenario. So if somebody is leaving a review and they're mad because you either require someone to wear a mask or don't require someone, depending on what side of the area you fall there, these would be considered politically charged reviews. They're against Google's guidelines. So if you get any of these where it's a very political in nature type thing, not really about your business, but more about the specific things that you do at your business and how, that's political in some way, Google will remove them. There was a really great article write-up on this from GatherUp that I linked to there. So you can read some of the examples. There were a lot of retail stores that were getting slammed due to their mask policies, and Google did remove all of the mask-related reviews. So stuff like that falls into this category and should get removed. Another one would be racist reviews. And this one gets a little confusing. So sometimes I've seen reviews where people call the person racist. So they're like, this attorney's racist. That alone usually would not get removed. But if the comments they are making about you or about your staff are racist comments, like in this example, like calling someone Black and not educated would be a clear example of a racist review. This would get removed for sure. Stuff where they're like just basically claiming that you are a racist, it's debatable, could go either way. I've seen both cases. So this one is not always as clear cut. Same with this one, references to illegal activities could go either way. But if they're saying you're doing something illegal, so in this case, this guy was claiming these people that work at this business were a bunch of stoners, doing illegal drugs is illegal. So we made the case to Google that yes, this is against your guidelines, and they did remove this particular review. So that's the ones that you will normally be successful with. I also want to touch on a few common ones we see that are negative reviews that don't generally get removed, unfortunately. The most common being ratings without text. So this is very common where you just get this 1-star review, absolutely no context. They didn't write anything. They didn't say what they're upset about. So as a business owner, this can be like extremely frustrating because you're like, how do I even respond to this? I don't even know what you're upset about. And crafting a response to these can sometimes be impossible. So I don't always even suggest responding to these types of reviews. These generally, like 99% of the time, do not get removed. So, I mean, you can try, but just know that it's very, very unlikely that this will get removed because there's nothing you can point to in the text. You can't say like the person said this or the person said that because they didn't say anything. So these are usually left up, unfortunately. But the good news is that these types of reviews, because they don't contain text, are not very visible. So if someone's pulling up your business on Google, they do get factored into your average rating, but they don't appear like when the default sorting list when the person like clicks to read all your reviews, the default is to shove these to the bottom. So that's good. They're pretty not visible. And then on the Google Maps app, for people that are using that app, they're actually not even there at all. So Google doesn't even include them on the Google Maps app. Again, they are still factored into your average rating, but the actual review itself is not visible on the Google Maps app. So that's good. Another one that unfortunately does not get removed very often would be low quality reviews. So these are, people that don't even like know how to spell things in proper sentences or get cut off or post like two word reviews on tons of different businesses. And you're like, why would Google even want this type of, quality of reviews? Low quality in and of itself is not a violation. So again, sometimes we've seen these get removed, but it's very unlikely. Another thing that is not against Google's guidelines is reviews posted across multiple sites. So if the person posts rampaging about something on Google, then they go over to Yelp, they rampage there, and then they go to Facebook and rampage there, that's totally fine according to Google. Like they don't care if the person wants to post the same opinion across multiple sites on the web, unfortunately. Another one would be mean reviews. So this is very subjective. There are certain words that Google does not allow. So the good news is that they are stricter than Yelp. Yelp is actually okay with like profanity, like you can use like F words and things in your reviews and they stay up on Yelp and Yelp refuses to remove them, which is mind-boggling to me. Try to use the F word in a Google review, it actually gets the review taken down immediately. So there are certain words that just don't even publish, but there's a lot of mean-spirited words that get through this. So, con artist, scammer, I've seen ones like shyster, douchebag, like lots of those get through and Google refuses to remove them. So keep that in mind. It's not great. I don't know why people feel the need to, use those types of words in reviews, but Google doesn't deem them against their guidelines. So that's another unfortunate one. So now I'm going to talk about just how to get reviews removed. I talked about what types of reviews you can get removed, but what's the actual process for doing this? So as I mentioned earlier, it's imperative that you already have your business listing claimed through the Google My Business platform. So that is like step one. If you haven't done that, you need to do that because you won't get any farther with Google if you haven't done that. So you need to be logged in under your account that owns the listing inside Google My Business to prove you're the owner, because reporting a review as the owner of the business goes farther than like if it was just a consumer reporting a review, it gets treated separately. So inside Google My Business, inside the dashboard, you or somebody that manages your listing, so that could be a marketing agency that manages it on your behalf, would go in there, locate the review. There's a little 3 dots thing beside the review and you click to flag it. When you flag it, the options that come up are not always self-explanatory. So pick the ones that kind of most represents the problem you're facing, but know that like it's not a concrete list. Like my list was much longer than their list, but pick one there. And then the next step is to wait 3 business days. And you absolutely have to wait 3 business days. You cannot proceed to the next step if you haven't waited 3 days. And again, weekends don't count. Googlers generally aren't working on Saturdays and Sundays. So that waiting process is annoying, but it's part of it. So after 3 business days, set yourself a little timer or something. There is kind of like an appeal process. You basically have to contact Google My Business Support. So the link to contact Google My Business Support is right there. Currently, there are 3 different options. There's an email, there's chat, and there's phone. My preference is chat. I feel like it's by far the easiest to communicate. I find phone support to be the worst. But you contact Google My Business, and this is sometimes necessary for some of the cases that are not overly obvious. Like if the person was a former employee, you wouldn't necessarily know that just by looking at the review. And when you flag it, there isn't any options to add in notes. So sometimes this is necessary for getting reviews removed, is this kind of like appeal process. So you contact Google My Business, make sure you tell them, I already waited 3 days, already flagged the review, it's not gone, etc. And then they will escalate it and get back to you again. Usually that process takes a few days and let you know if it can get removed or not. And if all else fails and you're still like confident, like, no, this is definitely against Google's guidelines, it falls into one of the scenarios I covered that, is against their guidelines. There is one further thing you can do at the end, which would be to post on the Google My Business forum. So this is a forum, I kind of referenced it a couple times, but basically Google has online forums for all of their products that are moderated by peers. So not like people that work at Google, people that work outside of Google and volunteer their time to basically help users. And why this is helpful, why you might get farther with this if the other ones have failed. The people that are running this are able to escalate threads to Google and like really make a case for why Google My Business Support was wrong. So it's always kind of where I tell people to go as the last course, the last thing that you try, not the first thing, because if you do, they'll just tell you to go to regular support. I am one of the moderators on this forum, so I've been doing this since 2012. It takes a lot of time, but it's great to be able to help business owners on there. And so feel free to send me a thread if you do have a scenario that gets to this point, and be happy to take a look at it. But this is really the kind of the last resort for people if they aren't getting anywhere with GMB support. The other option that you have, and this is something I want to say, doesn't come up a lot, but it's good to know about, is if there's like an individual user that is spamming, and this is a good example, this guy's going and leaving reviews for churches, like a whole bunch of churches that are, clearly not real experiences, and he's targeting churches. So if you run into a scenario like this on the Google Maps app, so it has to be on your phone, not something you can do on your computer, there is an option to flag the user's profile. So you go to the user's profile, click their name, and then there's an option basically there to flag the user as a spammer. And you can do that. We have seen that work a couple cases where the user's profile was very clearly spamming, not legit. So that is another way that you can send it to Google. It does go to a different team, just so you're aware. It doesn't go to the Google My Business team. It would go to the Google Maps team that's kind of responsible for keeping community stuff on Maps up to date. So different people. And then finally, if you can't get rid of the review, which there's gonna be lots that you can't get rid of. So when that happens, the really last step that you kind of have to do is to make sure you post a response to the review. So as far as review responses go, 97% of people that read reviews also read responses from the business owners. So people do read your responses. It is something to keep in mind, like your future customers are reading these, and that is important. So one of the other studies that we've seen also done on this talks about how responding to reviews can actually help your conversion rates as well. So people that have better responses and are responding timely have a better conversion rate than those who do not. And kind of the thing to remember when you post a response to the review is that the person who left the review is going to get an email alert. So this can be both a good and a bad thing, right? And I'm going to talk about what you need to include in your response, but keep in mind that if you have someone that's irritated and mad, your response can make them even madder. So use this as an opportunity to kind of show grace and not fuel the person even more, because they will get an email alert when you post your response. How quickly should you be doing this? According to a study done by GatherUp, the majority of consumers expect a response in less than a day. So definitely make sure you are responding to these timely. Don't wait weeks to post responses to reviews, and make sure it's kind of built into your everyday processes. And I do need to mention a few examples of how not to respond, because they're funny and also unfortunately happen a lot more than you think. So number one, don't insult the reviewer. Don't name call them. That's a very good way to make them even more mad. Don't threaten the reviewer. This is actually something we see quite a bit in the legal space. People will default to threatening legal action and, I'm going to sue you, blah, blah. This is not something that you would want to put in a response to a review. It doesn't accomplish anything. It doesn't cause the person to back down. It can come across as arrogant to people that are reading review responses in the future. So do not go this route when you're responding to reviews. This one is like really funny. So, as much as it's like so tempting to make fun of the reviewer, again, this is not going to accomplish anything good for your business. This was a guy named Matthew Diener, and left this 1-star review for this bar, and they respond with, "Fun fact, your name rhymes with wiener," which is hilarious. Like, I actually love this response, but it's not a good one. From a business perspective, you don't want to do that. All caps should be something you should avoid at all costs. Do not talk in all caps. This is shouting. It is literally up in people's face. It gives a bad impression to anyone reading it. Avoid it at all costs. And then I'm going to give you kind of at the end here the final thoughts of what you should be including in your response. So there's an article that goes into this at great lengths that I would suggest reading for more information on it. But first, don't write the response yourself. You are personally involved. You are more likely to be defensive and not kind of level, logically minded. Don't be emotional. And the best way to do that is to have somebody else who is not personally involved write the response or edit your response. Own the issue. Make sure, you're actually giving the person some thought and consideration. Maybe what they're saying is ridiculous and untrue, but you do have to, give them the benefit of the doubt and think, okay, their feelings are valid. So owning the issue goes a long way, and it's humbling, not easy to do, but something I'd suggest. Describe how future customers are not going to have this issue. So make sure you're clear on, why this is not going to be something that these future customers reading this are going to experience, how it's not normal. 4, offer to fix the issue. This is another, big one. If you're like a business owner responding to this review, you can say like, hey, here's my cell phone number. Please call me. We want to rectify this. And as a bonus, honestly, trying to solve it offline before you even respond to the review is even better. We've had so many law firms get rid of negative reviews by simply contacting the person that left it and working things out. So you'd be surprised. That can go a long way. And finally, I'll just leave you with a few tools that will help you with your review efforts. Whitespark is a really cool tool that you can see here that's free that will allow you to see how you stack up to competitors in your area. So it'll actually pick a business in the same industry as you who has the most reviews, so you can kind of see what you're up against. This is a tool from GoFish Digital that will calculate how many reviews you need to get to a certain average. So if you've got a 4.8 and you want to know how many it's going to take to get to a 4.9, this calculator will give you an idea. And then tools that help you with reviews, I mentioned GatherUp. This is a paid one, but there is a lot you can do with reviews, like posting them to social media, etc. So definitely a tool worth checking out. But again, this one, unlike the last two, is not free. So that's it for now. If you have questions about the reviews, I look forward to talking about those in the Q&A. Also, if you want to keep updated on everything that's happening when it comes to Google My Business or local SEO, feel free to subscribe to our newsletter, which is free. And thanks for listening.